Hi everyone, my name's Joe from Joe Films, and in this video I want to show you a really cool plugin for Resolve that can take your regular, objectively boring digital footage and turn it into a near perfect replica of some of the most popular and iconic film stocks. Before we get started, I must just mention that this video is not sponsored in any way. I'm not being paid to make this video, and all thoughts are my own. I did reach out to Dehancer, and they agreed to give me a free trial so that I could test it out and thereby share my thoughts with you. So please do trust that from here on in, all thoughts are my own. Now that's out of the way, let's get on to film emulation and what exactly that means. Here in the 21st century, digital is the most abundant medium, whether that's videography, photography, illustration, and so on. But many people still prefer analogue for its organic process and pleasing qualities in terms of the end result. Now, as modern standards go, the process of shooting on film is incredibly involved, and there are many more steps that you have to go through to reach said result, unlike digital, where you can just literally watch it on the miniature television on the back of your camera right after you're done shooting. Film is also a lot more expensive. You can buy a 1,000 foot reel of Kodak Vision 3 colour negative film for about £410. If you're shooting 24 frames a second, that would last you all of 11 minutes and 6 seconds. Considering you'll likely do multiple takes and the fact that you'll need to let the camera physically get up to speed before you can yell action, you can see how the price of shooting this way can quickly mount up. And then you're left with the process of developing reel upon reel of negatives, which in itself is time consuming and takes a specialist lab to do. Again, expensive, and thus the cost continues to rise. So why then would someone choose to shoot this way? Well, it's probably a few different things, such as the way the film renders colour, retains details in the highlight and shadow areas, and the overall natural appearance of a scene, and particularly skin tones. Digital cameras have of course made huge leaps in the last 10 years or so, particularly in areas like low light capabilities, but they still suffer from chroma noise, for example, and other issues that are inherent in an image made up of thousands of electrically charged pixels. While digital cinema and digital cameras have done a great job in catching up in terms of quality, versatility, and accuracies in image reproduction, some may even hold the opinion that it's surpassed film in those respects. Many filmmakers, even fellow YouTubers right here, still strive to give their digital image that filmic or cinematic look, which is a very generic term, but from filters attached physically to the front of a lens, through to color grading and other software-based filters, we try to manipulate our digital image to imitate that which is inherently analog in nature. This is not to say that film is perfect, it's actually far from it. And it's really the defects that we consider to be some of the more desirable aspects of the medium. Artifacts that manufacturers over the years have tried to minimize or refine in the production of their stocks. There are three main characteristics, the first being grain, which is visible silver crystals within a film's emulsion. And then you've got bloom, which is a combination of light scattering through a lens, usually more pronounced in vintage lenses with less clinical coatings than modern lenses. And then this becomes more pronounced when that light is scattered further by inconsistencies within the emulsion of the film itself. And then finally, halation, produced around the edges of darker objects in front of bright areas, like a person stood indoors with a bright window behind them, whereby a red-orange halo is formed with the addition of a reddish glare scattered into the midtones. These characteristics are non-linear, trying to replicate them using a single value overlay, similar to the grain you might add to an Instagram picture, won't result in an authentic emulation, and that's where Dehancer comes in. Dehancer Pro is a film emulation plugin that interprets a digital image and reproduces the analogous principles of the chosen negative film, from its exposure through to development and printing, and it also gives you the ability to fine-tune each aspect. Before I jump into the software and show you what it can do, I shot a short sequence on my Pocket 6K Pro flying on my new RS2 down at Lulworth Cove and edited it using Dehancer Pro. Take a look. As you can see from that video, granted it was sunset, so you've got that rich golden glow anyway, but this plugin just brings it to life, and I wanted to show you just how easy it is with Dehancer Pro. So let's take a look. Okay, here we are in Resolve, and I've got 3 clips here, all of little puppies, you're welcome. And I'm just going to show you really briefly the plugin and how I kind of set up my nodes for a very basic kind of grade. I mean, you could go crazy, but for this, I'm just going to keep it simple. So I've got 4 nodes so far: noise reduction, my primaries, I've got a little bit of a curve, and then my LUT. I shot this on a Fuji X-T4, so I've just got the factory F-Log2 wide dynamic range Rec 709 LUT on there. So I'm just going to add another node, and you can find the Dehancer plugin in your effects tab. You just drag it on, and then right away it gives you this kind of look, which isn't my favorite. I don't really know why they kind of throw one on to begin with. I'd prefer it if they just gave you like a blank slate that you can work on, but this is what you get. And like I said, I like to put a LUT in on a separate node, and if you do that, you can just set the source to Rec 709. If not, you can go ahead and choose from a whole selection of different cameras. They've got Blackmagic. They've just added these 2 separate ones. They did just have the 4K, now they've got the 6K, and you can go ahead and choose between Gen 4 and Gen 5 and your ISO base as well, which is really cool. But for this one, we're just gonna do Rec 709. From there you have your defringing sliders. This is basically to combat any chromatic aberration that you've got in your shot, and you can toggle it on and off here. I'm just going to leave that. And then we move on to film. This is where you choose which profile you want, and there's a hell of a selection of both photographic and cine film stocks. I mean, you can spend all day playing around with these. I kind of like the Fuji Eterna. For this one, I'm going to go with Vision 3 50D. It's a nice looking film stock, very popular. And then you have the push-pull, which basically simulates if you were to over or underexpose your film in camera and then bring it back when you develop it. And one side is quite cool and the other side is slightly warm, fundamentally. I just like to leave that in the middle, really. But yeah, we've picked our profile, now we can move on. Next up is expand, and this basically lets you choose your black point if your profile you've loaded has kind of messed up your exposure a little bit. Again, I like to do most of that in my primaries node, but this just lets you adjust it a little bit further. You can move around your white point if you want to make it brighter. I will leave them both how they are for now, because we're going to move on to print. And this is where you can choose your exposure, and I think I might be a little bit bright, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. That looks a little bit more even. And then we're going to add a little bit of contrast, maybe. Now this image is quite contrasty now. And this checkbox down here, the analog range limiter, basically simulates a more realistic film kind of dynamic range. So if we check that, it'll kind of squeeze everything. It'll bring the shadows up and the highlights down to get you that flatter classic film look, I guess. So that's really helpful. Maybe just turn the contrast up a little bit. And then the color density, from what I've found, is quite heavy on the reds. If I zoom into this bit of the red rope here that Otis is playing with, and we turn up the color density, you'll notice the red really just gets really saturated. And I've noticed it's really the warmer tones that it affects, and sometimes blues. And you can see in the coffee table and in Otis's fur as well, when I bring it down, it gets a little bit more desaturated. Best not go too crazy with that. I think maybe just 25. It's kind of like saturation, but again, a little bit less linear. I don't know if different profiles have different kind of density preferences, like which colors are affected. But yeah, that's that. And then we can move on to color head. Also, I should mention that each of these sections has their own enable function, so you can toggle between them and see what exactly you're affecting, which is really nice. So color head basically lets you slide between blues and yellows, magentas, greens, cyans and reds. So you can, if you've got a slight blue tint, you can fix it and put some yellow in there, which we actually do have a bit of a blue and green in our highlights. So I'll move the red up a little bit, move the blue down a little bit more towards yellow, and then again get some greens out of the way. And then we can see what we've done. Cool. Not a huge change, but you know, subtle. I mean, you can go crazy and then use this impact slider to adjust the amount of impact that this section is having on your image. I think that's nice. We'll leave it there and we'll move on to film grain. So this is where you can set up how much grain is affecting your image. So I'll just zoom into this section here because it's got quite a nice tonal contrast, and you can see the shadows, mids and highlights all in one kind of area. If I toggle this off, you can see the grain and what it's doing. It just adds a really nice texture, I think. Quite subtle like this, but you can obviously turn it up and create quite a gravelly image. Not my preference, but you can do it. And basically what it's doing is deconstructing your image and then building it back as grain, which is, as I was talking about at the beginning of the video, the kind of non-linear aspect of this plugin and how it really quite organically adds this effect to your image, not just an overlay over the top, but literally deconstructs your image and puts it back together granularly, which is really cool. This is too much for me, so I'm gonna just reset this. Maybe put this on 3. Amount, I'll turn that down a little bit. The film resolution slider basically lets you bring back sharpness. An overall characteristic really of film is a softer kind of defocused image, and the more grain you add, the softer it's going to look. So with this slider, if I zoom into this part where you can see this bit of fur over his eye, if I turn it right down, you can see it gets very soft. And if I turn it all the way up, it becomes nice and sharp, which is really nice. So if you want that kind of authentic film look, I'll just turn it down a little bit. It gives you a nice subtle softness. And if I turn all of this off, you can see exactly what it's doing. Again, I'll zoom in to this part. I think that gives it the best demonstration. Such a nice texture. And then you can control how much of this grain is in each of your shadows, midtones and highlights with these sliders. I kind of like how it looks. I think I'll leave it how it is. And you can also control the amount of color quite simply within the grain. So if I turn it up, you can see all the reds and colors within the grain. And if I turn it right down, it's basically using black and white grain. I don't mind it too much, maybe 40. I think that's quite nice. So again, we'll turn it off. That's your unaffected image. And that's it with the grain. Yeah, I think this is one of the most important characteristics of a realistic film emulation, and Dehancer does it really well. So that is film grain. Next we have halation. Now, I've tried it on this image and it's not, I mean, I'll show you. With this mask mode, we can just see the halation by itself. And as you can see, even if I turn the amplify setting right up, there's not really much, maybe a little bit around here, but there's not really much going on. So I will move on to this image of dear old Frankie. And you can see in the plants behind Frankie, the halation working pretty well. Basically the window is over here, shining through and reflecting off these cabinets. And as it's coming through these plants, you get this high contrast area, where in real film, you get this orange glow around your edges, and it's called halation. And you can control exactly how much halation you get with these parameters here. So again, we'll go on to mask mode so we can see exactly what we're affecting. And there's quite a lot in this image. If I just turn it up, you can see exactly what's going on. And this would obviously be quite harsh, but it just lets me demonstrate to you what we're doing. So this is like a threshold, your source limiter, and you can dial back the amount of area that is affected. I don't want to cut out too much. And this just basically changes the intensity of the halation. Smoothness lets you literally smooth out the glow You can see it kind of soften, and then you've got local diffusion, which you can get really quite crazy, and then global diffusion, and you can kind of tailor those. I like to keep those down quite low. And again, amplify just amplifies all of these settings. Right now would be a good time to turn off mask mode and see exactly what you're affecting and how much is kind of in your image overall. I think that looks pretty good. You can also change the hue of the orange glow. I like to just leave that where it is. And then you can adjust exactly how much your image is affected. If I just turn it off and on, even round like Frankie's eyes here, you can see some halation going to work there around her nose. Again, I like to keep this quite a subtle effect. I think it can get quite overwhelming and overpowering in an image if you use too much, and it's nice that we get to tailor it to exactly how we want it to look. So yeah, moving on to bloom. Now I've already set the bloom up for this one, and I'll just toggle it off and on so you can see. But it's the same kind of controls as halation. You can go into mask mode and you can see exactly what you're affecting. You can go crazy with it, put in as much or as little as you want. The diffusion kind of gives it more of a glowy kind of effect. And then amplify again lets you affect the overall amount of all these parameters that you've laid out. Yeah, that's that. And you've got some other sliders here like saturation. I just tend to leave these how they are. But yeah, that looks pretty good. Moving on from there, you've got Vignette. Pretty straightforward, I think. It's quite flexible too. If you've worked with a Vignette plugin, you'll be no stranger to this. But I tend not to use vignettes. So yeah, that's that one. And then we have film breath. It basically simulates the inaccuracies and exposures between frames. So you can get that kind of flickering. I'll try and show you a very extreme version if it will play. Oh, haven't enabled it. That might help. Now it's struggling to play. So this is a very extreme. You can see the colors changing. You can see the exposures jumping up and down here. Obviously you wouldn't do this much, but that just gives you an idea of what this is doing. So we'll just turn that off. And gate weave simulates the inaccuracies in the movements between frames as the camera mechanism rolls through the film. So you get that kind of jumpy, jittery movement, which adds to the film look, I guess, but I tend not to use this. I mainly use Dehancer for the color profiles, the grain, halation and bloom, but these are really nice to have. And if you really want to go all in on the film look, beyond that we've got a false color helper, so you can just turn that on and check your exposure and everything like that. That's really nice to have in the plugin itself. That's cool. And then you've got this final slider that affects how much of everything goes onto your image. So we can turn it right down. That's it with zero Dehancer at all. And then we can add as much in as we want. You can also export LUTs from here, which is pretty neat. I haven't done that yet, but that's nice to have. And then you've got just your license info, and you can check which profiles you have, and it can download some new ones if there's updates. I will just show you one thing I really like about it, and it's not something that will save a completely overexposed shot, but if you have a part in your shot where you didn't expose for and it suddenly gets brighter, like here in Frankie's whiskers, Dehancer does a really good job of rolling off those highlights. See, without the plugin, it's quite harsh and ugly. Dehancer just softens it and makes it a little nicer. I mean, you don't want to overexpose your shot, but if you do happen to get a little bit like that, Dehancer can help you out and make it semi-usable. Also, I just want to demonstrate the effects of noise. If you have a noisy shot and you put Dehancer over it, it's just going to make it worse. So we have this shot here. Right now I have noise reduction on and the Dehancer plugin is on. If I turn Dehancer off and zoom into the rocks here, let's find a better place. Zoom into this bit, and I turn noise reduction off, you can just see all this. I mean, I shot this on my Pocket 6K Pro, so you can see all the chroma noise, all this red, blotchy, ugly stuff. If I then turn Dehancer on, it just kind of makes it go all mashy. and it's not very nice to look at. So just make sure you're working with a nice clean image. See, that's got rid of all of that now with the noise reduction, and then we can turn Dehancer on and it just looks so much better. I just turn noise reduction off. You just get a little bit messy. So yeah, just make sure you're working with a nice clean image before you start. I mean, that works for everything, not even Dehancer, just it's a good habit to get into, just to get a nice clean image before you start messing around with it. So there you have it, Dehancer Pro, a really cool way to quickly and accurately get your digital footage looking like you shot it on real film. And you have the flexibility there to go as far with it as you like. I'm really excited to use this plugin some more. I've used it on 2 professional jobs already, and you can try it out for yourself. There's a free trial that you can download with limited capabilities, or you can purchase the full thing, links to which I will leave in the description below. Dehancer are always updating and adding cool features and new profiles. They've just added Kodak's 2383 print film. They're also working on a Final Cut version and a Photoshop version of the plugin. So you really get a lot for your money. If there's any comments or questions you want to ask me, or you just want to express how adorable my friends' dogs are, leave that all in the comments down below. Let's have a chat. Like this video, subscribe to my channel for more content like this, sort of. And I just want to say thank you very much to Dehancer again for letting me play around with this awesome plugin, and to you for watching. But that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, be a good human, and get outdoors. See ya.